The movie begins with a vertical video showing factory workers preparing to protest against the authorities. The reason behind this unrest is a safety violation that injured their colleague Karen. The main instigator of the rebellion is a worker named Michal. The factory management refuses to listen to the discontented employees, escalating the conflict into active confrontation. The factory director calls the police, who start beating the workers. Enraged, Michal grabs a police officer and begins strangling him, an act caught on video that becomes key evidence in court. Sometime later, Michal visits Karin, who is unable to walk due to her injury and is undergoing treatment. He promises to move in with her after serving his sentence. Meanwhile, Karen is scheduled for another operation. At the same time, Michal's daughter, Selma, becomes the target of her classmates' mockery as they repeatedly watch the footage of her father attacking the police officer. Unable to bear the ridicule, she lashes out at one of her classmates, prompting her mother, Michal's ex-wife Alice, to be called to the director's office of the equestrian school Selma attends. On the way, Alice listens to the radio, where news about climate deterioration and impending disasters dominates the airwaves. Her brother, Bryce, meets her at the school, determined to ensure that Selma is not expelled. The director seems to be looking for a reason to get rid of the troublesome student, but this time the matter ends with a stern moral reprimand. Later, Alice reminds her daughter that the boarding school is a valuable opportunity for a girl who loves nature and horses despite the high cost. Unexpectedly, Selma asks for permission to visit her father, even though it is not his visitation day. Alice agrees, and Selma visits Michal, showing him her favorite blogs, which he finds unimpressive. She then suggests a way to relieve the itch caused by the ankle monitor Michal is required to wear. Suddenly, Selma asks her father not to move to Belgium with Karen. Michal explains that she can visit him anytime, as it's only a 2-hour drive. After the trial, he lost everything: his job, friends, and even his family. Only Karen stood by him, and now she needs him. Selma has no choice but to acknowledge his reasoning. She turns on the TV, which is broadcasting yet another report about an impending catastrophe in Europe. Michal dismisses it, saying life is already complicated enough without worrying about potential disasters. The next day, everyone goes about their routines. Michal heads to work, and Alice drives Selma to her boarding school. On the way, heavy rain causes Alice to have a minor accident. After sorting things out, she reaches the nursing home where she works as a caregiver, now without her car, which needs repairs. That evening, Alice notices rainwater seeping into the house through an improperly closed door. She places a towel over the puddle, unaware of the suspicious stains forming on it. The next day, Selma goes to her forest training session. Meanwhile, Alice and her colleague read news about acid rain causing massive damage. Feeling anxious, Alice decides to bring Selma home. Michal, on the other hand, inspects the warehouse roof with his colleagues, where dents have formed due to the rain. Alice calls him, asking for a ride to the boarding school. Michal declines, explaining that it's hard for him to take time off, whereas her brother, being self-employed, has more flexibility. As the rain starts again, Michal begins to worry about Selma's safety. Back in the forest, Selma's horse grows restless. The trainer asks her to wait while he guides the others back and returns for her. Michal eventually agrees to drive Alice to the school, where other parents are also picking up their children. While Alice heads inside, Michal hears a radio warning about acid rain approaching their region, advising people to stay indoors and avoid travel. Alice returns, having learned that Selma's class has not yet returned from their trip. Pointing Michal in the right direction, the estranged couple drives toward the forest under darkening clouds. The road ahead is blocked, and with the storm approaching, Michal takes a detour onto the opposite lane and cuts through a field. Selma, meanwhile, notices the first drops of rain falling and sizzling as they hit the ground. Terrified, she sees panicked horses, riderless, charging through the forest. Her own horse breaks free and runs off. The girl flees down the trail, away from the approaching storm, while Michal reaches the forest and spots the stables in the distance. Alice drives around the area, searching. Michal calls out to Selma, and she runs toward him with all her strength. They reunite just in time to take shelter from the dangerous rain under a roof. Michal calls Alice, letting her know he found their daughter. Alice arrives at the stables. Michal and Selma, wrapped in a horse blanket, make it to the car, and the family drives away. On the road, they encounter a traffic jam filled with other evacuees. Road workers dart between the vehicles. One worker opens their van door, pleading for help, but Michal shoves him out and urges Alice to drive anywhere they can. The family eventually stops at an empty supermarket, where they find some clothing and supplies. Alice calls her brother, who promises to come for them, but scolds her for turning to Michal for help. He advises them to head east, where acid rain hasn't yet reached, and says he'll send them an address where they can wait for him. Meanwhile, Michal and Selma improvise a makeshift cover for the car using fabric they found, hoping it will offer temporary protection. Michal repeatedly tries to call Karen, but her phone is unreachable. They set off, though Michal doubts the car will make it to Bryce's contact. The vehicle is damaged and unreliable. His fears come true. Late at night on an acid-corroded highway, the car breaks down. Forcing the jammed door open, Michal pulls his daughter out and leads the family to a nearby diner. Inside, the tables are set for a celebration, but the place is abandoned except for a cat left behind by the staff. Michal finally reaches Karan, who begs him not to take unnecessary risks. The call is cut short. Inspecting the kitchen, Michal tests the water for safety and pours some for the cat, which sparks outrage from Selma. In the fridge, they find sweets and champagne, which, lacking water, they decide to consume. Michal gets an idea to fashion makeshift protective footwear from baking molds, but postpones the plan until morning, suggesting they first eat whatever they can find in the cafe's storeroom. As they discuss the upcoming meeting with Bryce, Alice assures everyone that he will come for them, leading to yet another argument between the estranged couple. Selma pleads with them to stop, but they ignore her. Later, everyone lies down to rest. Selma searches for the cat and finds its lifeless body. Shocked, she crawls into bed with her mother, trying to sleep while Michal stays awake, pondering their next steps. The next morning, they set out on foot toward the town Bryce mentioned. However, the only way to reach it is by crossing a river via a bridge guarded by the military. Soldiers allow pedestrians to cross in limited numbers to prevent the rain-damaged cables from collapsing under too much weight. However, the crowd surges forward, overwhelming the fragile barriers. In the chaos, Michal and Selma fall behind, while Alice is ushered ahead by the soldiers. They instruct her not to linger and begin dispersing the crowd with tear gas to reduce pressure on the bridge. Alice sees the bridge starting to crumble. She tries to return, but the rushing crowd pushes her forward. The bridge railings give way, and she, along with other unfortunate souls, plunges into the river. Selma runs to the riverbank, desperately trying to help her mother, who struggles to stay afloat, burning in the river's acidic waters. Alice fights until her strength fails her completely. Michal barely manages to grab his grief-stricken daughter and drag her away from the dangerous river, which carries Alice's disfigured body further downstream. After this tragedy, Michal and Selma arrive at a refugee camp. Michal calls Karen to share updates and learns she is being transferred to another hospital in Antwerp. Attempts to reach Bryce are unsuccessful, prompting Michal to decide to head to Karen instead. The military offers transportation in one of their trucks. Michal informs Selma that they will be going to Antwerp since Bryce isn't responding. Selma is unhappy with this news and remains in shock over her mother's death, but allows herself to be seated in the truck bed with other survivors. Soon, the convoy halts in a forest due to blocked roads. The soldiers order everyone to disembark as the path ahead is only passable on foot. Before long, dark clouds gather overhead. Thunder prompts the group to move faster, descending into panic as they attempt to escape the storm. Michal pulls Selma along, but at some point, exhaustion overtakes them, and they lag behind the rest of the refugees. The rain begins to fall just as Michal spots some ruins in the forest. He pushes Selma into a basement, following close behind. Exploring the dark tunnels, they find an exit. It turns out to be part of an old sewer system. When the rain finally stops, they continue their journey. However, in the dim passage, Michal stumbles and begins limping badly. They make their way across a field and reach a town. Michal knocks on doors, but no one answers. The place seems deserted. As they walk through the streets, Selma breaks down, sobbing for her mother. Unable to console her, Michal continues searching for shelter until he suddenly collapses. Spotting movement in a nearby house, Selma calls for help. Michal regains consciousness in the house. They have been taken in by Deborah, a mother caring for her sick child. Deborah is not pleased to have guests, especially noticing Michal's ankle monitor. She offers him a bath but refuses to share food or water, explaining that she and her son have little to spare. Michal, more interested in charging his phone, reassures Deborah that they won't stay long as they need to reach Antwerp. Meanwhile, Selma discovers a dialysis machine in a room damaged by acid rain. The machine emits a warning signal, drawing Deborah's attention. Irritated, she asks them to leave. Before departing, Michal offers to help move the dialysis machine from the second floor to the basement, where it will be safe from acid rain. Grateful for his assistance, Deborah allows them to spend the night in the garage, though she still refuses to share food or water. Michal, armed with an axe, breaks into a neighboring house to scavenge supplies, reasoning that no one is there. Selma talks to Deborah, recounting the horrors they've experienced, and suggests staying longer, arguing that it's too dangerous outside. Meanwhile, Michal listens to a voicemail from Karan, in which she shares her new address and expresses hope for his safety. Later, Michal prepares a sleeping area in the garage pit. However, Selma confesses that she doesn't want to go to Antwerp, believing she's not wanted by Karan. At dinner, the survivors converse, but Michal grows frustrated with Deborah's disapproving looks and her refusal to let her son share food with the guests. He reiterates that they will leave in the morning and advises Deborah to evacuate as well, as her house is crumbling. That night, they sleep in separate spaces, Deborah and her son in the basement, and Michal and Selma in the garage. Concerned about the strangers, Deborah locks the door from the inside. In the middle of the night, acid rain corrodes the plumbing and the toxic liquid seeps through the cracks. The caustic water releases poisonous fumes that fill the air. Michal tries to warn Deborah, but the locked door prevents him from reaching her, and no one hears his banging. As the house begins to collapse, Michal drags Selma to the garage, where they find a car. Selma protests, not wanting to abandon Deborah and her son, but Michal starts the vehicle and drives off. In the dense, toxic fog, visibility is nearly zero. Adding to the chaos, the car's navigation system malfunctions, steering them into a field where the car gets stuck. Selma panics, and Michal, overcome by a nervous breakdown, yells at her. Distraught, Selma runs off while Michal exits the car to assess their surroundings. They find themselves in a farmer's field, where a burst water pipe floods the area, transforming it into an acidic swamp. Michal realizes that Selma has run off, while Selma herself discovers she is trapped in the middle of the acidic sludge. She calls out for her father, and Michal drives across the field toward her voice, but the car becomes hopelessly stuck in the muck. Struggling to free himself, he abandons the vehicle and trudges toward his daughter on foot, ignoring the acid eating away at his legs. After a grueling effort, he reaches the car and collapses onto the hood, completely drained. Selma has no choice but to pull him onto the roof of the vehicle. By morning, Michal's legs are covered in severe blisters, and the fabric of his pants has been entirely eaten away. At dawn, a passing armored personnel carrier spots them. Soldiers rescue the pair and take them to a refugee camp. There, Selma learns that there is no news from her uncle, and the worst blow comes when she is informed that Corinne, the woman her father had been so desperate to reach, has died. Selma goes to the infirmary, where Michal is lying, now having lost both his legs. Unable to tell her father the heartbreaking truth, she promises to find out more about Karen later. She rests her head on his chest so that he won't see her tears. The film avoids post-apocalyptic imagery, rivers of blood, or mangled bodies. Yet this makes it even more terrifying because the disaster was so close, and humanity was utterly unprepared for the consequences of its own actions.